Major funding for these programs is made possible by grants from Chase Commercial Term Lending and Capital One Bank, New York Community Bank, the Witkoff Group, M&T Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns, Jean Tomasi and Webster, Greenberg Traurig, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Friedman, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hap Investment Developers, Herrick Feinstein, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, John Katsimides, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, New Banks, People's United Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Continuum Company, Urban American, and these friends.
So the parents come from Italy. They end up, one side ends up in the Lower East Side, then they end up, coal mine, New Brunswick. Then they have a child, and they become involved, a school teacher and involved in the community, become the mayor of North Brunswick. And then the third generation is here. And, I want to be a lawyer. Maybe I'll be a school teacher, but I really want to be a lawyer. I want to clerk for a judge. I want to get involved with politics. And then to get himself to be one of the most dynamic developers for probably one of the best dynamic cities in New Jersey is New Brunswick. And I'm happy to have Chris Paladino from DevCo here.
Great being here.
So tell me about your grandparents and how they arrived in America.
It's the great American story. My paternal grandparents, my grandfather came here, he was 10, 11 years old, had relatives on the Lower East Side, it's what's now Little Italy, and they said, you can go to school or you can go to work. And 11, 12-year-olds went to work, and he learned to make clothes. So he was a tailor. Went back to Italy on a trip, thought it was a vacation, got drafted into the Italian Navy during World War I, met my grandmother, brought her back here, and the rest is history.
Okay, so they come back here, and they come back to where?
To New York City.
To New York City. And, for people who remember, there was a big clothing company called Bond Clothing. And Bond Clothing had a factory, plus they had stores around the neighborhood, but they had a factory in a city called New Brunswick. Right?
And that kind of brought them out to New Brunswick. And they did, what everybody wanted to do, bought a house.
They go out to New Brunswick. This is your grandparents.
Correct.
And where's the coal mining side?
That's my mother's family. My maternal grandfather was a coal miner in Pennsylvania and died at a very early age, like 23, 24 years old. And she was raised by her mother, who moved to New Brunswick with a lot of other of her generation and worked in the pharmaceutical industry, worked for Squibb, making penicillin.
Right, making penicillin is what you said to me. So, and how...
Probably became immune to it because the way they worked in those conditions in those days.
Okay, so now how do they meet?
My parents met at a bowling alley and went out for pizza, and the rest was history.
Okay, so tell me, so your father, I believe you said, was born in 1935? 33.
Right, he's 80 years old.
Your father grew up in New Brunswick.
He grew up in New Brunswick. In New Brunswick, like many northeastern cities, he grew up in the Italian section, spoke Italian, had some Irish friends that lived 3 blocks away.
So he met this Hungarian woman?
Hungarian woman who grew up speaking Hungarian in the Hungarian side of town. They had both graduated college, both first in their families to do so. My mother went to what was the college of Women's College for New Jersey, which became Douglas.
Which was in New Brunswick.
Which is in New Brunswick, and she lived with her mother and took the bus over to the college and went to school, and they got married soon after that.
And your father becomes a school.
Both of them became school teachers after my father got out of the Navy, and taught in New Brunswick for a very long time. He taught junior high school, taught history, American history, and my mother taught 3rd grade.
And your father subsequently grows to become a principal.
Becomes a principal in North Brunswick about the time I'm about 12 years old, and becomes, retires not that long ago. He probably worked till he was about 70.
Now, tell me, how did your father get involved with politics, which has an influence on your life later on?
Yeah, he kind of got drafted to run for town council, got elected several times, and eventually ran for mayor, most of the time throughout my high school years. Made a name for himself, was very successful. Maybe turned me off to elected politics, because you realize if you're a school principal and a mayor of a town, if it's snowing, they're calling your house and their garbage isn't picked up, or if they got a problem in school, people are calling your house all the time. But he had a pretty healthy career as mayor of North Brunswick.
So tell me about yourself growing up. Okay, you're 54.
Right, 1960.
1960, and you were born in New Brunswick.
I was born in St. Peter's Hospital, like almost everyone is. Still today, they probably deliver 6,000 babies. My parents, rented out an apartment in North Brunswick, and I lived, 2 blocks from New Brunswick in North Brunswick, and lived a pretty, normal life that you did when you were in those days.
Talk to me about growing up in North Brunswick.
It was great. You walked to school, you had a paper route. You disappeared all summer, then you played in the park. You got home by the time the street lights came on, classic story. There was a lot of tradition kind of to my childhood. You went to church, you went to your grandparents' house for lunchtime. My grandfather cooked, wore his jacket and tie. The man always had such beautiful suits. You went home, watched the Met game, fell asleep. You went to the Jersey Shore in the summer.
Right, and as you were saying, you went to the Jersey Shore Monday to Friday because somebody else was using.
Right, you realize later on in your life that most of your vacations were, going to someone's home at the Jersey Shore, and you went on Monday and you had to leave it Friday because they were there on the weekends, or you were visiting other relatives. That had homes places. Most of your vacations were visiting people.
Now, when your father ran for office, were you involved with handing out flyers or putting signs up, or?
Yeah, I was probably overly involved. I was probably that pesky 15-year-old who was pushing his way into a lot of things. Gave me a very good taste for the good, the bad, and the ugly of politics. Because it's rough, it's a rough part of the world.
Now, he was Republican or
Democrat?
He was a Democrat at that time.
My grandfather was probably a Marxist, union organizer in the garment industry. So I think my father's roots are truly embedded in the Democratic Party.
So I asked you why you had this aspiration for law. You said it was something that probably grew out of your father.
I think seeing how hard my parents worked as teachers, maybe sometimes feeling they're a bit underappreciated, and that practicing law, if you're in the 70s thinking about it, it was still probably much more of a status symbol, and there was a status that you could actually make some money. So I really had set my sights on being a lawyer.
So you graduate high school.
Yes.
Where did you graduate?
North Brunswick High School.
North Brunswick High School. You went to Rutgers, which was in New Brunswick, but you had an opportunity. You were thinking of Johns Hopkins,
right,
and you were thinking of Bowdoin, right?
Yes.
So tell me about the experience of going down to Baltimore.
My parents concept of a trip to see college was they took me to the train station. So I took the train to Baltimore. And it was really kind of an interesting cultural experience because you were now kind of thrown in, you grew up in North Brunswick, you were either Jewish or Italian, and everybody's roots were really found in New York City somewhere.
That's right. Everybody relocated there from New York City.
Wherever the bus went.
Right, wherever the bus was, so you can have the convenience, or subsequently the train. So you were in North Brunswick, Metuchen.
Everybody grew up and everybody had family still in Brooklyn. Every couple of months you'd go visit the relatives in New York. They lived a bunch of butcher shop or something like that. So there was a commonality of experience of people who I went to high school with. I probably still hold the Christian record for bar mitzvahs. I think I went to 14 when I was 13 years old. But now this was a very different cultural situation being at Johns Hopkins. Everybody's parents were fathers or grandfathers were physicians. And you started to sense that there was a much different world out there, but felt a little bit out of place. When I went to visit Bowdoin, the thing that totally took that off the list is that I was there during the Great Blizzard of 1977. It took me 28 hours on a Greyhound bus to get back to New York.
So you realized what snow could be.
Yes.
So then you decided to go to New Brunswick and you go to Rutgers. So talk to me about your undergraduate days in New Brunswick at Rutgers.
Well, it was a place that I was very comfortable with.
You played football during high school.
During high school, but not at Rutgers.
Right.
But there was really very little having to become adapted to a different place. I grew up there, kind of knew the streets of New Brunswick pretty well. Now we're talking 1978, a much different place than it is today.
Right.
In some ways, a little more exciting.
Right. In 1978, it really happened at the early part of the 70s, even when DEVCO was created. New Brunswick was really having some difficult times.
It was gritty. It was
gritty. There was crime. Wasn't, even though it was, as we would call today, a transit-oriented development because of the fact that the train was built in 1906 over there. It was gritty, and people weren't going to New Brunswick. Rutgers was there. I mean, Rutgers is celebrating its 250th anniversary, but it wasn't.
Right, and I remember being at orientation and them getting up and telling you not to go past the bridge. And I'm looking around saying, well, that's the New Brunswick I know past the bridge. So I would kind of lead the tours down to, because drinking age was 18. New Brunswick had some of the largest percentage of saloons and pubs of anywhere on the East Coast because there had been Camp Kilmer. So I was actually a popular guy when I started college because I knew the ins and outs of the places to go.
Right, you were a tour guide.
Yeah.
So during college, tell me about summer jobs and...
I benefited from, there's a lot of good things about staying close to home. And that one of them being is that I got a very early exposure to kind of politics on a statewide level. So I was able to work for the Democratic State Committee. I was able to be an intern in 1980 when they had the New York City, when Jimmy Carter was nominated the second time in New York. Spent time doing that, working with Noah Gottbaum's son, actually, and doing.
Right. And didn't you also meet somebody who you worked with later on, a governor, as a student?
Yeah, actually, I did spend a summer working for the Speaker of the Assembly, and shared an office with Jim McGreevey for a couple of weeks. So it's a very small world, New Jersey. I often say there's about 400 or 500 people, and I would say today that a week doesn't go by that there's somebody doesn't cross my path that I at least spent some time with when I was at Rutgers.
So you graduated Rutgers, and since you knew you wanted to go to law school, how did you decide to go to Camden, Rutgers Camden?
I got into Rutgers Camden, I got into Seton Hall, and Rutgers Camden was cheaper. So I went to Rutgers Camden.
Now Camden...
Never let my mother visit until the day I graduated.
Really?
My wife, who eventually went to Rutgers Camden, still says to this day when they drove her down there, her mother cried. Because as much as we thought New Brunswick was gritty, Camden was truly similar to Dresden.
It's true. It's rather similar. The fact that New Brunswick was a J&J city, Camden was Campbell Soup
Correct.
City. So the industry really helped the business or hurt the business.
And they were still brewing tomato soup because there were days you'd go out and smell the tomato soup in Camden. But I went to Camden Law School, in a Camden being a very little bit of a different place. And actually lived in the city. I lived behind the Walt Whitman Museum for very, very cheap. And, you know, it was an experience. Nobody bothered us. Philadelphia was just a quick drive over.
Right, and then you were able to work during the summers and.
Yeah, during the, you know, I worked for the Speaker of the Assembly for one summer, and during the school year I had the opportunity to work for David Norcross, who was just about to become the general counsel to the Republican National Committee. So I got a little balance in my life. He always trying to convince me to become a Republican. Maybe that took longer than he thought it would. But again, that was a great experience, a great exposure, and you know, that experience added to really what my professional life is now, because there's a whole group of people I went to law school with, many of them who represent me.
So you finished law school, and I think one of the great things which really helped your career was this clerkship.
Yeah, I had the very, very great opportunity to work for Judge Eugene Serpentelli, who not only was the assignment judge in Ocean County, so I got to live at the beach for a year.
Right, you went out to Tom's River, you lived at the beach.
It was a whole different cultural experience. You know, when the judge would do the weekly call to assign the cases, it was not unusual for judges to ask to approach the bench and whisper to the judge that the stripers were running and could they have an adjournment till tomorrow. But he was also one of the 3 Mount Laurel special masters, and the fair housing controversy surrounding New Jersey for all of those years. So I was able to be involved with some of the best lawyers in New Jersey on some cutting edge public policy that was being created. Plus I had a judge who really, really enjoyed being not only a judge, but kind of a mentor to his law clerks. So we'd be there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were there till 6:30, and probably the best experiences came before he went on the bench and after he went on the bench.
So, but now, hey, it's time to grow up. You gotta get a job.
Get a job, gotta get married.
Right, at which you met your wife.
Met my wife in law school.
Who happened to have some pretty good grades, as you said.
Yeah, I often say that I did exactly what Bill Clinton did. I found the smartest woman in my law school and decided to marry her. I thought it would serve me well, particularly when I had my children later on in life. But she'll tell you that the first time she met me, since she was assigned to me, I was kind of one of the tour guides of how much she despised me. But it kind of worked out. So she was a year behind me in school, and so I clerked for a year while she was finishing. We got married the week after she took the bar exam, went on a honeymoon, came back on a Sunday, and we both started practicing law on Monday.
And now you leave Tom's River and you go to Roseland, right?
I go to Roseland, which was another just terrific experience. A big litigation firm, Connell, Foley & Geiser, with groups of people who really enjoyed practicing together. Most of these guys had been there their entire career. They lived together, their families grew up together, so there was this family atmosphere. But it was one of those places where you could be at a big law firm and they would let 26-year-olds go out and try cases. So I got kind of turned out into the world and spent time in the courthouse in Hudson County and in Essex County and Morris County, and was able to do trial work, take depositions, be a real lawyer. And you felt like.
So what happens then? You say, I was making money, now I want to go back to poverty? Yeah.
Well, there comes those. Hopefully, we all have several of those moments in our life.
That's right.
I've been fortunate to have several of them. But this one, Governor Florio, Jim Florio was a congressman. He was running for the second time. He had been a law school professor of mine. And so I volunteered for the campaign. And because I knew him, I spent a lot of time with him out on the road and did advance work. And right after the election, he said, why don't you call Angelo Genova, who you know, and tell Angelo what you'd like to do in the administration. And he was kind of my.
And what do you do?
So I go into the governor's office and the council's office, and I do a lot of work in casino law, land use, local government services, until my son was born, and my wife left her relatively well-paying job, and I had taken a pay cut to come into state government, and we spent all of our savings. when I went and decided to do this, Adrian Foley, who was kind of the patriarch of the law firm, I went to him and said I was considering doing this. And he said to me, he said, Chris, you're going to be a partner here, and you're going to have a great career here, but if you don't take this opportunity, you'll regret it forever. So I was having second thoughts when I was looking at my bank account and figuring how I was going to make a mortgage payment. But again, another one of those great moments. I had met Tony Kosha, who was recruited by George Zoffinger, two guys who've had incredible influence on my career, as both as friends and mentors and partners. And Tony had been recruited to run the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. I think he was 2 years older than I am. George Zoffinger was the chairman because he was the Commerce Commissioner. And he said, look, I could pay you $25,000 more. Come over here. May you learn something about real estate.
So you go to the economic development.
Right. And the first day, we were putting together the deal for GE Aerospace to locate the Camden. I knew nothing about real estate. And he said, we're having a real hard time with the general counsel. Why don't you just go and yank his chain a little bit? So I went down and caused trouble for about an hour and a half.
A good litigator knows how to cause trouble. And you did that for about 3 years, right?
About 3.5 years. And, fortunately, there was and again, another one of those moments happened. Jim Florio lost the election, which was not the fortunate thing, but I was able to take advantage of that. When I go back to what happened in 1981 when Jim Florio lost the first time, I often, when I see Governor Kane, I reminded him that if he had not won that election, I probably would not have gone to law school, met my wife, and been doing what I was doing today, because it set me on a different direction in life.
The term we call in Yiddish was beshet.
Yeah. So I was going to go practice law, and I was going to practice here in New York.
Right, you
Tony
said
Kosha,
Wendell's
Marks. And George Zoffinger, who had taken over the Kane and Roebling Family Bank, National State Bank, and had moved it to New Brunswick, called me and said, we were working together at the time because we were running the World Cup host committee when the World Cup was here in '94. So George and I were spending every day together. And he said, I just came from lunch with the senior executives at J&J, and he'd like me to take over as chairman of this company called Devco. And I said, yeah, I know Devco. I used to protest against them when I was in high school. And he said, well, it's kind of a mess, but let's give it a shot. We can't work it out in a year, you got to do something else.
So let's talk about Devco, because, that's 1994, right?
Correct.
And you go to Devco, I think there are 3 people?
There were 3 people.
And basically, as what we would really say was Devco was a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson.
At the time, yes.
At that time.
Yes.
Because they were the daddy.
They created it.
They
funded it.
They funded it.
The chairman of J&J was always the chairman of Devco.
Right. And Devco was really created because of the problems in the 70s at Rutgers, that they needed this redevelopment, and there's a lot of things over there. And they had accomplished, the first thing was the Hyatt Regency. Yeah,
they took a very proactive stance. The guys at Johnson & Johnson, John Heldridge in particular, hired I&Pay to do a master plan. They hired the American Cities Corporation to kind of give them an operational plan. They decided to create a not-for-profit modeled on things that had happened in New Haven with some of the insurance companies. And they used Devco to attract other private sector interests. So they did the Hyatt Regency, and they did 2 office buildings and some retail buildings with Dyson Kitts and Moran from New York.
Right. Now, but Devco, when you went there, as you said, they had debt. They had unsecured debt, which was guaranteed basically by Johnson & Johnson. They had an office with 3 or 5?
3 people.
3 people. And basically, it was the mid-'90s, another recession, not as bad, but a recession over there. And basically, the best part of New Brunswick was the transportation. Right. New Brunswick had the transportation, more than one stop, but the head stop over there. And Devco, since you've been there over the last 20 years, you've done probably like $1.6 billion of development over that period of time. And lots of things which really made today's time the biggest item when people talk, including my friend John Casmatidis and anyone else, is transit-oriented developments. And if you look at Jersey City, you look at cities in Long Island and other parts, if you can have housing, live, work in there, as we see in Lower Manhattan today with the World Trade Center and everything, That's what makes the situation. You know, people are talking about the Hudson Yards, but the Hudson Yards is going to only have one train, and one day a million people it may be there. New Brunswick has roads, and it has transit-oriented development. So talk about what's happened over the last 20 years with New Brunswick and DEFCO.
Well, you know, look, we, as I said, the day I took over, there was $112,000 in the bank. Today we have a balance sheet with a couple $100 million on it. And we had $8 million of unsecured debt. And I felt like the scene from the candidate when, you know, he Redford wins the election and they go into the closet and say, well, what do we do now? So what we really decided to do was to kind of look, you know, everybody comes into a new situation and thinks they know everything. And we said, look, this place has come away since when I left it in 1982. What's gone right and what's gone wrong? And you really appreciated that Johnson & Johnson and the city administration had been very deliberate. And they learned things about, you know, leverage and creating critical mass, building buildings, changing intersections.
Coupled with the fact that you had 2 great hospitals and a medical school.
And a city that's downtown was only about 8 or 10 blocks. You know, it's an interesting anomaly. There's only 55,000 people. It's close to 60 today. When I got there was probably 45. But 2 teaching hospitals, a major state research university, a Fortune 50 company, this county seat. It has a lot of things. I often tell people what makes my job work because of the things that got set in motion by my predecessors, you know, back in the 70s, is that, you know, I can call the chief judge of the state court, the county administrator, the mayor, the president of Rutgers, the president of 2 hospitals, the dean of the medical school, and they'll all call you back in a couple hours. You know, these are people you see, people you know what they're thinking, you know what's on their agenda. So we started building real public-private partnerships, which really was important. If you look at any of our projects, you'll see kind of us weaving those organizations into all of them because it kind of creates a safety net. And probably the most exciting things, I often say this because it's, you know, what I am doing at the moment is the most exciting, important thing.
Right.
But, you know, we just finished approximately 1.3 million square feet. It represented about $250 million that had for sale housing units, rental units, affordable units, parking spaces, retail, fitness centers, all at the train station.
Right. Which is exactly what we need for today. Let's talk a little bit about family. Tell me about, so you're married to this woman?
Erin Dolan.
For how long?
28 years.
And you have 3 children?
3 children.
Tell me their names and their ages.
Connor Patrick is 23 years old.
What is Connor Patrick doing?
Connor graduated from school 2 years ago and is working for an energy company. Mary Fiona is going to be a senior at Notre Dame. She's on the track team. She's spent last summer with NBC, and she's working for a public relations company, Mercury, here in New York this summer. And my youngest is not so young anymore. She's 16, and she's the ballet dancer in the family.
And you got 2 fighting Irish over there.
Yes.
Notre Dame, and you know. But I think for the kid from New Brunswick, you've made New Brunswick and North Brunswick, since you grew up in North Brunswick, you've made a major effect for the city and the state, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.